Please, save my father." The words pierced through the downpour like a bullet, raw and sharp. Jasmine flinched, her back pressed against the damp brick wall of the alleyway, her breath fogging in the cold air. She had heard many things screamed in the streets, insults, sirens, threats, but never that. Not from a kid in a soaked white shirt, trembling like a leaf, eyes wide with fear and pleading. His hand gripped her sleeve, desperate, shivering, a boy far from where boys like him should be. Jasmine stared at him, heart pounding, unsure whether to run or disappear back into the shadows she had become so good at melting into. She had been invisible for days. 3 nights ago, she'd stood outside her own home, if you could call it that, holding the last of her mother's things in a trash bag. Her mother had died barely a week before, a slow death from pneumonia that no one cared enough to treat. Her stepfather, a bitter man with more beer bottles than teeth, had pointed to the door with the back of his hand. "Get out, ain't no charity here." So she ran. Since then, she'd wandered from corner to corner, her stomach twisting with hunger, her throat dry from silence. Strangers spat at her, called her thief. Shopkeepers chased her away like a stray dog. She had cried once, curled up behind a dumpster, just once. And now, this boy. "I'm not a doctor," Jasmine said, her voice rough and cautious. "I don't know what you think I can do." "He's dying," the boy sobbed, wiping his face with soaked sleeves. "He just collapsed. He's not breathing right. I called for help, but no one came." Jasmine looked into his eyes. They reminded her of her mother's on that final night wide. Helpless. Asking for someone, anyone, to do something. "What's your name?" she asked, softer now. "Ethan." She hesitated. Ethan, a name like silk. The boy looked like silk too, all delicate and polished, out of place in this alley. "Where is he?" "Home, not far, please." Jasmine didn't respond. She just stood up, the cracked sole of her boot squelching against the wet ground. She adjusted her too large army coat, the one she had fished from a trash can near the bus station. Inside her jacket pocket was the last thing her mother had given her, a folded napkin with the words, "You still know how to save a heart." "There, I'm not promising anything," she muttered, "but take me to him." They ran, if you could call it running. The rain turned sidewalks into rivers, drains into whirlpools. Jasmine's legs burned from cold and hunger. Her breath came out ragged, every step heavier than the last. They reached a wrought iron gate half swung open. Beyond it, a mansion loomed, shadowed by ivy and silence. Ethan led her through the front door, slipping on the marble floor, pointing up the staircase. Jasmine followed, dripping, shivering, eyes wide at the polished wood, the gold-framed portraits. In one of the rooms, a man lay sprawled on the floor, chest rising shallowly. A businessman late 40 seconds. Maybe early 50 seconds, his skin pale. His jaw clenched. Ethan dropped beside him. "Dad. Dad, wake up." Jasmine froze. She wasn't trained for this. She didn't belong here. But then something rose inside her, something from her mother's voice. "If a heart falters, press right here, baby girl. Don't wait. Just press. The body remembers what kindness feels like." Jasmine knelt, placed a trembling hand on the man's chest right above the sternum, and pushed firmly, rhythmically. 1, 2, 3. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on. Don't quit now." Ethan watched, wide-eyed, mouthing silent prayers. The man gasped, just once. Then his eyes rolled. "We need to move him," Jasmine said. Ethan stared. "What?" "There's a hospital down on Clark. He needs more than this. You said no ambulance is coming. So we take him." "Take him?" Jasmine was already crouching. She slipped her arms beneath the man's back and knees. He was heavy, dead weight. She grunted, struggled, then hoisted him up against her back. "What are you doing?" Ethan cried. "Carrying your father," she hissed, adjusting him with effort. "Unless you've got a better plan?" She stood, legs shaking. Every inch of her body screamed in protest. But she took a step, then another. Outside, the storm raged louder than before. Lightning arced across the sky like veins of anger. Water pooled at the doorstep. Jasmine stumbled forward. Ethan ran beside her, opening the gate ahead, glancing over his shoulder, soaked to the bone. Cars whooshed by, their drivers blind to the girl carrying a grown man in the rain. At the edge of the street, Jasmine slipped. Her knee struck the pavement, and the man's arm slipped from her grip. She screamed not from pain, but from fury. She shoved the pain aside, readjusted him across her back, and kept moving. Each step was a war. They reached the edge of the hospital district just as thunder cracked so loud it silenced the world. Jasmine collapsed against the emergency entrance door, banging it with her foot. "Help!" she cried, hoarse. "Somebody open up!" Lights flickered inside. A nurse ran forward, then another. The door flew open. Jasmine fell to her knees, the man still on her back. "He needs help," she whispered. Now, as hands lifted the man from her, Ethan wrapped his arms around her soaked coat. "You did it," he whispered, voice shaking. Jasmine didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and let the storm wash over her. If this moved you, like this video and drop your city in the comments. Someone nearby might be watching too. Jasmine sat slumped on a bench in the emergency room, her hands dangling at her sides, her coat dripping a steady rhythm onto the white tile floor. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, too bright for the hour, too sterile for the ache in her body. Her arms throbbed from carrying Ethan's father, her knees ached from the fall, but she didn't move. Not yet. Across the room, Ethan stood at the glass partition of the ICU hallway, his small hands pressed against the window as nurses and doctors crowded around the motionless figure of his father. Monitors beeped, machines hissed, and the storm still raged outside, shaking the panes with each gust. Jasmine watched him from the corner. He hadn't looked away from that window since the doors closed. His soaked shirt clung to his back, and his shoes squished every time he shifted his weight. He looked like a statue built of worry and rain. A nurse approached Jasmine, a clipboard in hand. She was older, with tired eyes and silver streaks in her bun. She glanced at Jasmine's coat, then her bandaged knee, then down at the empty chair beside her. "You're the one who carried in Mr. Caldwell?" Jasmine nodded, wary. The nurse hesitated, then softened. "He's stable. Your timing may have saved his life." Jasmine blinked, not knowing how to respond. Praise wasn't something she knew how to wear. "Do you have a last name?" the nurse asked gently. Jasmine hesitated. Her throat tightened. "Just Jasmine." "Okay, Jasmine. You might want to get checked out. You're bleeding." Jasmine looked down. A slow ooze of red seeped through the tear in her jeans at the knee, but it barely registered. "I'm fine," she said. "Save that for someone else." The nurse smiled faintly, made a note on the clipboard, and moved on. Jasmine turned back toward Ethan. She wondered if he was mad at her for not being faster, for not being enough. But then he turned. And for the first time since they entered the hospital, Ethan smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't full of joy, but it was real. He walked slowly over, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. When he reached her, he didn't sit. He just stood there, his hands awkwardly clasped in front of him. "Thank you," he whispered. Jasmine shrugged, suddenly shy. "You already said that." "I know," he said, "but I needed to say it again." They sat in silence for a while, the storm muffled by the thick hospital walls. "I thought he was going to die," Ethan said suddenly. "I thought I was going to be alone." "You're not," Jasmine said. The words surprised her. She had never been one to comfort anyone, but tonight felt different, like everything she knew about herself had shifted. He looked up at her. "Where do you live?" She blinked, startled, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "Wherever the sky doesn't leak." Ethan tilted his head, confused. "You mean you don't have a home?" Jasmine nodded once. "Not anymore." "Why?" "My mom died," she said, voice tight. "My stepdad told me to leave. Said I was just one more mouth he didn't want to feed." Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked down at his hands. "My mom died too," he said after a pause. "When I was 6. I don't remember her much, but Dad keeps her picture on his desk." "Nye." Jasmine looked at him with new eyes. "You don't act like a rich kid." He smiled again, a little brighter this time. You don't act like someone who just carried a grown man across 3 blocks in a storm." They sat together, two soaked figures from different worlds, bound by loss, by fear, and now by something else, something unnamed. A doctor entered the room, his white coat spotted with water. He walked directly to Ethan, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Your father's awake. He's asking for you." Ethan bolted upright, but then paused. "Can Jasmine come too?" The doctor looked surprised but nodded. "I don't see why not." Ethan grabbed Jasmine's hand. She froze, unsure whether to let him or not, but she didn't pull away. His hand was warm. They walked down the corridor together, past machines and whispered prayers, until they reached a room marked ICU 3. Inside, Ethan's father lay on the hospital bed, pale but conscious. Wires connected him to blinking monitors. His eyes were heavy-lidded but alert. When he saw Ethan, his lips curled into the faintest smile. "Hey, kiddo," he rasped. Ethan ran to his side. Jasmine hovered in the doorway. Mr. Caldwell's gaze shifted toward her. He squinted slightly, as if trying to place her face. "Is that the girl?" Ethan nodded. "She saved you, Dad. She carried you. She didn't even know us." The man blinked slowly. His hand lifted weakly and gestured for Jasmine to come closer. She stepped in, hesitant, her boots leaving muddy prints on the polished floor. "Thank you," he said, voice barely audible. I don't know who you are, but you." Jasmine swallowed hard. "I'm no one," she said. His eyes locked onto hers. "Not anymore." The machines beeped. A nurse entered to adjust the IV, but the moment had already sunk in. Ethan turned to Jasmine. "You're not leaving, right?" She looked at the floor. "I should." "Why?" She didn't answer. Ethan's father spoke again. "Stay, just for tonight." Jasmine nodded slowly. And outside, though the storm still raged, Jasmine felt, for the first time in days, a place that didn't feel like running. The hospital room was dim except for the soft pulse of machines and the distant flicker of lightning outside the window. Jasmine sat in a vinyl chair near the door, trying not to lean back too much, afraid she might fall asleep and lose her guard. Old habits died hard. Even here, under fluorescent lights and a watchful nurse, her body remained tense, ready to run if someone raised their voice, or worse, their hand. Across from her, Ethan had curled into a stiff hospital chair, a blanket thrown across his lap. He was already asleep, face turned toward his father's bed. Mr. Caldwell lay still, his breathing steady now, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the monitor beside him. Occasionally, he stirred, but the beeping sounds remained constant and calming. Jasmine hadn't intended to stay. She had told herself she'd leave once they knew he was safe, that she wasn't part of this story beyond that moment on the wet sidewalk. But then Ethan asked her not to go, and his father's stranger, billionaire, man of marble and glass, had looked at her not with suspicion, but something that almost felt like welcome. Still, her thoughts spun like the rain against the window pane. A nurse named Claire brought her tea, real tea, in a cup that wasn't chipped. "You did something remarkable tonight," she said quietly as she placed the cup down. Jasmine didn't answer. She just stared into the steam. Claire added gently, "You're not invisible here, sweetheart." That word. Invisible. Jasmine had lived in it like a coat. She thought of her mother again, how she used to hum while cooking whatever scraps they had, how she used to wrap Jasmine's hands in a towel warmed in the microwave and whisper, "One day, baby girl, someone will see you," and never look away. No one had. Not until tonight. She shifted in her seat and glanced at Ethan. The boy mumbled something in his sleep, his fingers twitching slightly. He was dreaming. Jasmine wondered if it was about the storm. She took a sip of tea. It burned her tongue. She didn't mind. Then the low, gravelly voice from the bed startled her. "What's your name?" She looked up. Mr. Caldwell's eyes were open, fixed on her with an exhausted but clear focus. "Jasmine," she said quietly. "Jasmine," he repeated, like he was memorizing it. A beat passed. The machines beeped. The rain whispered against the windows. "How old are you?" he asked. 17. "Where's your family?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to tell him, but because there wasn't much to say. "My mom passed last week." My stepdad made sure I didn't stay. I'm sorry. She nodded, lips pressed tight. He tried to adjust himself, winced, then sank back into the pillow. You carried me 3 blocks? She looked down. Wasn't really a choice. You could have walked away. She didn't answer. You didn't. Still silent. Then he said something that landed like thunder. I want you to come back with us. Her head snapped up. What? When they discharge me, he said. You're coming with us. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. You don't know me. I know enough. You're rich, she said bitterly. People like you don't take in strays. I'm not doing it out of charity. Then why? He looked toward his sleeping son. Because my boy looked me in the eye tonight and told me you were the reason he still had a father. I don't know what you've done in your life, Jasmine. I don't care. Tonight, you became part of mine. Jasmine stood, heart pounding. That's not how this works. How what works? You don't fix people by offering them a guest room. I've seen too many broken promises in rooms bigger than your entire house. I'm not promising anything, he said. Just a roof. A meal. Safety. For tonight. Tomorrow. You decide. She stared at him, trying to find the trick, the angle, but there was only exhaustion in his face and something harder to resist. Sincerity. She looked back at Ethan. His arm was still draped across his chest, his mouth slightly open in sleep. A child had trusted her tonight without question. He hadn't cared about her clothes, her smell, her scars. He had just seen someone who could help. And now, somehow, he was asking for her to stay. She sank back into the chair. One night, she said. One night, Mr. Caldwell echoed. But both of them knew that the moment had already rooted deeper than that. The hours passed. Jasmine dozed briefly but never fully let go. Her hands were still clenched when the morning light began to break over the city, soft and golden through the storm-washed window. Birds chirped faintly. A nurse came in with a tray. Mr. Caldwell stirred, and Ethan yawned loudly, rubbing his eyes. Jasmine stood and stretched. The stiffness in her joints reminded her that miracles came with bruises. Mr. Caldwell looked at her with a faint smile. Do you like pancakes? She blinked. Pancakes? There's a place near the hospital. They do cinnamon butter ones. Best in Chicago. Ethan perked up. She's coming with us? That's up to her. They both looked at Jasmine. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running. The rain had stopped. Chicago looked rinsed clean, like the city had shed a layer of its grime overnight. Sunlight shimmered on the wet asphalt, reflecting in puddles that still lingered near the curb. For most, it was just another Tuesday. But for Jasmine, stepping out of the hospital with Ethan and his father, it felt like walking into a world that no longer hated her. Mr. Caldwell leaned on a cane now hospital-issued and temporary, but refused the wheelchair. The stubbornness in his jaw reminded Jasmine of her mother, the way she used to insist on walking to the corner store even when her lungs wheezed. You okay? Ethan asked, glancing up at her. Shouldn't I be asking you that? She replied, though her voice held no bite. He grinned. You carried a grown man across half the city. You win. She didn't say it, but her legs still ached, and the wound on her knee stung with each step. Yet, there was something grounding about this moment, about walking beside people who didn't flinch when they looked at her. Mr. Caldwell led them to a silver sedan parked just outside the ER entrance. His driver, a broad-shouldered man in a navy jacket, stepped out and opened the back door. Jasmine, you sit in front, Mr. Caldwell said. She blinked. What? No, I can sit in the back. In front, he repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. She hesitated, then slid into the passenger seat, painfully aware of her ripped jeans and mud-stained coat against the pristine leather interior. The driver said nothing, just offered a polite nod before pulling into the road. They didn't go far, just a few blocks east to a small corner diner with fogged windows and a blinking neon sign that read, Mabel's Place, home of the Stack Attack. Inside, the air smelled of butter, syrup, and too much coffee. It was warm, filled with the soft clink of forks and the hum of local radio. A waitress, probably in her 60s with bright red glasses, approached with menus in hand. "Morning, Caldwell's," she said, her eyes twinkling. Then she looked at Jasmine and paused. Not with suspicion, just curiosity. "And who's this?" "This is Jasmine," Mr. Caldwell said simply. "She's family." The word dropped like a stone into Jasmine's stomach. She froze, unsure how to process it. The waitress smiled. "Well then, any friend of the Caldwells. Sit wherever you like." They took a booth by the window. Jasmine sat stiffly, her hands under the table, unsure how to belong in a place that served real butter and clean silverware. Ethan pointed at the laminated menu. "You ever had cinnamon butter pancakes?" She shook her head. "You're in for it," he said. Mr. Caldwell ordered for them all, like he already knew what she'd want. When the food came, 3 plates stacked high, syrup glistening, butter melting at the edges, Jasmine stared at hers for a moment before picking up her fork. Her first bite silenced everything. It had been days since she'd eaten more than a stolen granola bar. The warmth spread through her like a memory, like something her body had forgotten it needed. Ethan watched her with wide eyes, clearly delighted by her reaction. "What?" she mumbled, mouth full. "Nothing," he said, laughing. "It's just good to see you smile." Jasmine paused, surprised. She hadn't realized she was smiling. For a while they just ate. Between sips of orange juice and shared bites, the conversation turned light. Ethan told her about his school, about his best friend Jalen who had a lisp and always got them both into trouble. He told her about the dog they used to have, Button, and how it once peed on his dad's shoes during a business call. Mr. Caldwell listened, his hand wrapped around his coffee mug, eyes softer than the night before. Occasionally, he'd add something dry and witty, the kind of humor that reminded Jasmine he was still sharp despite the IV marks on his arms. But then he looked at her directly. "So, Jasmine, what happens now?" She stopped chewing. "You mean, after pancakes?" "I mean after everything." "Where do you go?" She looked at her plate. The syrup swirled like uncertainty. "I haven't figured that part out yet," she said quietly. "Do you want to?" She looked up. "I'm not saying move in forever," he added. "But I've got a guest room, a real one, with a bed, not a bench, hot water too." Jasmine's fingers gripped the edge of the table. She felt her pulse behind her eyes. The offer wasn't a lifeline, it was a door she thought had closed the moment her mother took her last breath. "I don't want pity," she said. "I don't give it," he replied. "I'm offering stability. You get to choose what you do with it." Ethan chimed in. "And you can try my cereal. It's got marshmallows shaped like spaceships." Jasmine laughed, a real laugh. She shook her head and wiped her mouth with a paper napkin. "I've never lived in a house with a cereal cabinet before." "Then it's time," Ethan said. She met Mr. Caldwell's eyes. For a moment, neither spoke, but she nodded once. "Okay. 1 night, maybe 2. We'll see." "Months." He held out his hand across the table. "Deal." She hesitated, then shook it. The waitress returned with the check and a small to-go box of fresh muffins. "For the girl," she said. "You look like you could use a few extras." Jasmine blinked hard. "Thanks," she whispered. As they stepped out into the fresh air, Jasmine felt something new unfold inside her, not comfort, not quite, but possibility. And possibility was more than she'd dared ask for. The drive back to Crescent Hill was quieter than the one that brought them to the diner. Ethan had nodded off in the back seat, his cheek pressed to the window, one hand loosely clutching the muffin box the waitress had insisted Jasmine take. "Mr. Caldwell sat upright, his breathing still a bit uneven, but his presence steady. Jasmine, seated in the front seat again, stared out at the city as it passed by. The sunlight now breaking clean through the clouds, glinting off buildings that once seemed too far above her. She wasn't sure what she expected from the Caldwell home. She had seen it once. In the blur of rain and desperation, a grand facade behind black iron gates. Now, dry and alert, she could take in the sheer scale of it. Wide stone steps, leading to double doors, the color of dark oak, trimmed bushes manicured into perfect symmetry, windows so tall they reached like hands toward the sky. The car pulled to a slow stop in front of the house. The gate had already been opened. Jasmine's stomach tensed. The driver got out first, opened the door for Mr. Caldwell, who moved slowly but with quiet pride. Then he opened Jasmine's. She stepped out, boots scuffing the clean concrete. "It's just a house," Mr. Caldwell said, noticing her hesitation. "It won't bite." She gave him a sidelong glance. "It probably costs more than the hospital." He shrugged. "It doesn't know that." The front door opened before they reached it. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a slate-gray dress stood waiting Miss Holland, the house manager. Jasmine could tell from the way she held her tablet and her spine that she was used to things being in order. Her eyes swept over Jasmine quickly, cool and assessing, but she said nothing. "Miss Holland," Mr. Caldwell said as he stepped inside, "this is Jasmine. She'll be staying with us for a few days." Miss Holland smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. I'll have the guest room prepared." Jasmine didn't miss the pause in her tone, or the way she avoided making direct eye contact. The old instinct to shrink returned, but she caught herself. No, not this time. She lifted her chin slightly and followed Ethan up the stairs. The inside of the mansion was warm, glowing with polished wood floors, framed paintings, and the faint scent of lavender cleaner. Everything was too perfect. Like a museum where nothing was allowed to be touched. Jasmine walked with careful steps, her boots still damp, leaving faint prints behind. She rubbed them off with the heel of her sock. Ethan turned back. "Want to see your room?" "I thought you'd forget. I never forget people who save lives." He grinned, and something in her chest softened. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, across from Ethan's. Jasmine stepped inside and stopped breathing. It was bigger than the living room of her old apartment. A queen-sized bed sat beneath a wide window, its sheets tucked and folded like something out of a catalog. A small desk stood in the corner, next to a shelf filled with books. A clean towel, a bottle of lavender lotion, and a pair of folded pajamas sat atop the bed. Beside them, a note in clean handwriting read, "Let us know if you need anything. You are safe here." Safe. That word echoed in her mind like a foreign melody. She turned to Ethan. "Do you live like this all the time?" He looked around. "I guess. It's just my normal." Jasmine swallowed. "It's not mine. You can borrow it for a while," he offered. "I don't mind sharing." She sat on the edge of the bed slowly, half expecting the frame to creak or sag. It didn't. "This feels illegal," she muttered. Ethan chuckled, then turned serious. "You really okay staying?" Jasmine hesitated. "I don't know." "I'm glad you are," he said. "Just for tonight." There it was again tonight. A single night. One small promise she could allow herself to believe in. "Thanks," she said softly. He left her to rest. And for a long moment, Jasmine just sat there. The silence was different here. No sirens, no shouting, no dripping pipes. Just a calm she didn't know what to do with. She showered for the first time in a week, the hot water biting into the cuts on her hands and knees but soothing the tremors inside her bones. She scrubbed until her skin stung, then stood beneath the stream until her fingers pruned and her throat caught. Later, wearing the soft cotton pajamas that didn't itch or smell like plastic, she curled up in bed and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind rustled the ivy along the windows. Somewhere down the hallway, a grandfather clock chimed once. Jasmine closed her eyes. She still wasn't sure she trusted any of this. But for now, she was warm, full, clean, and no one had asked her to leave. Maybe that was enough. Morning light streamed through the high windows, cutting across the soft comforter like golden ribbons. Jasmine stirred, disoriented by the silence, by the unfamiliar weight of warmth and stillness. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was, and even longer to believe she hadn't dreamed it. The guest room smelled faintly of lemon polish and new linen. Her backpack, soaked and muddy the day before, sat cleaned and folded in the corner. Someone, probably that Holland lady, had taken the time to clean it. It unnerved her more than it comforted her. No one did things for free. She sat up slowly, stretching. The pajamas she wore were too big but soft, and her hair, still slightly damp from the night before, curled at her shoulders. She hadn't slept in a bed with a frame in over 3 months. And never one like this, like it had never been used, like it had waited just for her. There was a soft knock at the door. She tensed. "Yeah?" It creaked open, revealing Ethan in a gray hoodie and socks, holding a plate with 2 slices of toast and a peeled orange. "Hey," he said, walking in without waiting for permission. "Didn't know what you liked." but Dad said you might not be ready for a big breakfast. She stared. You brought me food? He grinned. It's just toast. No, no one's ever brought me toast. Well, he said, placing the plate on the nightstand, now someone has. She watched him fidget. You always act like this? Like what? Like you're not afraid of people like me. He blinked. What do you mean, people like you? You know, she gestured to herself. No address. No trust fund. No last name worth remembering. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed and shrugged. I don't know. You saved my dad. That makes you someone. Jasmine didn't know what to say. She picked up a piece of toast and took a bite, trying to hide how hungry she still was. He changed the subject. Want to see something cool? Define cool. Come on. She followed him barefoot through the long hallway. The mansion was quiet, like a sleeping animal. The carpets muffled their steps. They passed tall portraits and long antique mirrors, until they reached a set of glass doors at the back of the house. He pushed them open, revealing a sprawling backyard, an old oak tree in the center, its limbs stretching wide, and a tire swing hanging lazily from one branch. The grass was damp, glistening from the storm, and birds chirped from the roof. My mom used to sit out here, Ethan said. She loved this tree, said it reminded her of home. Jasmine stepped onto the stone patio, squinting in the light. Where was home? North Carolina. Somewhere small. I don't remember much. Just pictures. Oh. They stood in silence for a minute. You can come out here whenever, he said. Nobody'll bother you. Jasmine nodded. Thanks. He tilted his head. You ever climb trees? I used to. We can climb this one, but not today. Dad says no jumping off anything while he's still recovering. She smiled despite herself. A cough behind them made them both turn. Miss Holland stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable as always. Mr. Caldwell would like to see Jasmine in the study, she said. When you're ready. Jasmine's stomach twisted. Did I do something wrong? She asked. No, Miss Holland replied. He just wants to talk. Ethan gave her a thumbs up. Don't worry, he's cool. Jasmine wasn't so sure. She found the study at the end of another hall, dark wood paneling, tall bookcases, a desk that looked older than she was. Mr. Caldwell sat behind it, a blanket over his legs and a cup of black coffee in his hand. He gestured for her to sit. Sleep okay? She nodded. Good. Because I wanted to have a conversation now that we've both had a minute to breathe. Jasmine sat rigid in the leather chair. Am I in trouble? No, he said gently. But I think we need to figure out where we go from here. I was planning to leave today, she said. I didn't want to overstay. I'd like you to stay. She blinked. For longer than one night, he added. I've talked to my lawyer about enrolling you in school. A real one. Not just temporary shelter kind of school. You'd have your own room, your own schedule, a tutor, to help catch you up. Jasmine's hands curled into fists in her lap. Why? Because someone gave you nothing, he said, and you still gave everything. I didn't ask for anything in return. I know, he said. That's why I'm offering it. She looked away. People don't just do that. Not without expecting something. Oh, I expect something, he said quietly. That you try, that you don't give up on yourself. Jasmine looked at her reflection in the glass of a bookshelf. She barely recognized the girl sitting there. I don't know how to be here, she whispered. Then we figure it out together. She didn't answer right away. But she didn't run either. And that, for today, was enough. Jasmine stood at the threshold of the dining room, hands shoved into the pockets of her borrowed jeans, her shoulders tight beneath the clean hoodie Ethan had insisted she take from the hall closet. The smell of roasted chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, and something buttery drifted toward her like a dream she didn't want to wake from. The table was set for 3, cloth napkins folded into fans, the silverware lined up so precisely it made her nervous. This feels like a trap, she muttered under her breath. You said something? Ethan asked, peeking his head around the doorframe. Nothing. Come on, you're gonna love the mac and cheese. Miss Holland puts like 4 types of cheese in it. I think one of them is illegal. Jasmine didn't laugh, but a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She followed him in slowly, her steps uncertain. Mr. Caldwell was already seated at the head of the table, still pale but dressed in a crisp sweater and slacks. He looked less like a man who nearly died 3 days ago, and more like the CEO of something important, which, of course, he was. "Glad you're joining us," he said as Jasmine hesitated behind her chair. "I wasn't sure if I was supposed to." "This isn't a courtroom," he said. "You don't need permission to eat." Miss Holland entered silently with a steaming casserole dish, placing it in the center of the table. She gave Jasmine a slight nod, more acknowledgement than yesterday, but not quite approval. They served themselves in relative quiet. Ethan loaded his plate like a kid who hadn't seen food in a week. Jasmine took a modest scoop of potatoes, some chicken, and a piece of cornbread so golden it felt sacred. As she chewed her first bite, her shoulders relaxed a little. It was warm, creamy, real. "Good?" Mr. Caldwell asked. She nodded. "You don't talk much at meals, do you?" Jasmine set her fork down. Never had many that weren't on the floor. Or rushed. Or alone. He nodded slowly, not pressing, just listening. Ethan filled the silence with chatter about school and how he hated math homework and how he once fell asleep during a science project and drooled on a frog. Jasmine nearly choked on her water at that one. After dinner, Mr. Caldwell asked Ethan to go upstairs and finish the assignment he'd been putting off all week. He groaned but obeyed. As the boy disappeared up the stairs, Mr. Caldwell turned to Jasmine, more serious now. "You sure you're okay staying another night?" She looked down at her empty plate. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Whatever's true." She took a breath. "This is nice. Nicer than anything I've had, but I don't want to start needing it." He nodded again. "Needing something isn't weakness. It is when it gets taken away." His eyes met hers, and there was something behind them, not pity, not charity, understanding. "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep," he said. "So let me say this clearly. You're safe here, for as long as you want to be." She didn't respond right away. The words echoed, heavy, terrifying, and strangely comforting. For a long time, she had trained herself to expect the rug to be pulled out, the door to slam, the kindness to expire like spoiled milk. But tonight, no one told her to leave. Later, in the hallway upstairs, Jasmine passed Ethan's room. The door was cracked open. She heard him laughing, really laughing, as he watched something on his tablet. The sound was light, full, without weight. It startled her. She'd forgotten what it sounded like, laughter that didn't come with apology. In her own room, she stood by the window, staring out into the moonlit yard. The oak tree stood still, its branches no longer whipping in the storm. She opened the window an inch and let the night air touch her face. It smelled of rain and freshly cut grass. On the desk sat a notebook and a pen. She picked it up, stared at the blank page for a moment, then wrote, "I don't know if I belong here, but for the first time in a long while, I want to." She closed the notebook and set it down gently. Outside, a wind chime whispered in the breeze. Inside, for once, there were no locks on the door. Jasmine awoke to the faint smell of toast and brewed coffee drifting upstairs. The air in the guest room was still, the light slipping through the curtains soft and golden. It felt like a hotel dream, the kind you don't want to wake from too soon. She sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She'd slept through the night without interruption, a small miracle. No shouting, no clanging pipes, no heavy footsteps outside a shelter door. Just silence, and the distant hum of a quiet house. Her fingers brushed against the notebook she'd written in the night before. She ran a thumb over the cover but didn't open it, not yet. By the time she made her way downstairs, Ethan was already at the table, a bowl of cereal in front of him, and one foot swinging idly beneath the chair. Mr. Caldwell sat nearby, reading something on his tablet, his glasses perched low on his nose. "Morning," Ethan said with a mouthful of cereal. "You want some?" "I'll take toast," Jasmine replied. "Thanks." Miss Holland, ever efficient, appeared without needing to be asked, sliding a plate with warm, buttered toast and a glass of orange juice in front of her. Jasmine offered a small, grateful nod. "Sleep okay?" Mr. Caldwell asked, glancing at her over the rim of his glasses. "I did. Good. We've got a visitor coming by later today." "Just a heads up." Jasmine stiffened slightly. "What kind of visitor?" "An old friend. He's with a youth advocacy group I fund. He helps kids like you get proper schooling and paperwork sorted. Nothing you have to commit to, but I wanted you to meet him." Jasmine looked down at her toast. Her appetite faltered. Are you trying to make me someone I'm not? No, Mr. Caldwell said calmly. I'm trying to help you remember who you could still become. Huh. That silenced her. The toast went cold on her plate, but she ate it anyway. Around 11, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. A man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a brown leather satchel, stepped out. He wore a pressed navy jacket and walked with the confidence of someone used to boardrooms, but when he smiled at Jasmine, it was genuine, not rehearsed. Name's Leonard, he said, offering a hand. Heard a lot about you. Zeri. Mostly good things, I hope, Jasmine muttered, shaking his hand tentatively. All good, he replied. The kind that make you want to be better. Leonard and Mr. Caldwell retreated to the study for a while. Jasmine remained in the den, sitting near the window, pretending to read while the clock ticked loud in her ear. She wasn't used to having her name passed around. She wasn't used to people knowing she existed. An hour later, Mr. Caldwell called her in. Leonard wants to ask you a few things, he said gently. Only if you're comfortable. Jasmine nodded once and stepped inside. Leonard smiled again. No pressure. Just a chat. Mind if I ask you a few background things? Sure, she said, keeping her tone even. Full name? Jasmine Taylor, I think. My mom used her maiden name sometimes. Birth certificate? Don't have it. Social security number? She shook her head. School history? On and off. A few months here and there. I think the last official place I went was Lincoln Middle. 6th grade. Leonard scribbled a few notes, then looked at her again. That's more than enough to start, he said. With Mr. Caldwell's support, we can work on getting you registered. Placed into a program that meets you where you are. Academic tutoring. Trauma counseling. Maybe even scholarship aid, if you're open to it. Jasmine crossed her arms. I'm not looking for handouts. He leaned forward, voice calm. We don't do handouts. We do hand-ups. That's different. She blinked at him. It was the kind of thing her mother might have said, strong, but never ashamed to accept help when it was given with dignity. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. After Leonard left, Jasmine went out to the backyard, pacing beneath the oak tree. The tire swing swayed in the breeze, squeaking faintly. She kicked at a patch of dirt near the base of the trunk, trying to steady the thoughts whirling in her head. Everything okay? Ethan called from the porch. I don't know. He stepped down into the grass, barefoot, and joined her beneath the branches. You don't have to say yes to anything. I know, but also, you don't have to say no. Jasmine looked at him. Why do you care so much? He thought for a second, then shrugged. I don't know. You're the first person I've met who didn't treat me like I was fragile, or weird, or just a rich kid. I'm still not staying forever. I know, he said, smiling. But if you did, I think the house would feel better. She exhaled, then, for the first time, reached out and gave the tire swing a small push. It spun once, then slowed. She watched it, thinking about how motion didn't always mean escape. Sometimes it just meant learning how to keep moving without running. That night, back in her room, she picked up the notebook again. She wrote, Today I learned that some people don't want to fix you. They just want you to stop fixing yourself long enough to breathe. The days passed like whispers, gentler than Jasmine expected. She had imagined that staying in the Caldwell mansion would feel like wearing clothes that didn't fit. But slowly, cautiously, she was adjusting to the rhythm. The house was quiet but not cold. The people weren't warm, exactly, but they were steady. Sometimes, that was more valuable. Each morning, she woke up before Ethan, pulled on the same pair of clean jeans from the laundry room, and helped Miss Holland with breakfast prep. It wasn't asked of her. In fact, Miss Holland had once remarked that Jasmine didn't need to earn her keep here. But Jasmine couldn't just sit around while others worked. It wasn't in her bones. She chopped fruit, wiped counters, learned how to make coffee strong but not bitter. Miss Holland still hadn't softened completely, but she'd started calling Jasmine dear instead of young lady, and that felt like a small win. Ethan, meanwhile, had gone back to his school routine. Caldwell insisted on structure, even after his hospital stay, and mornings were now filled with Ethan's grumbling about homework and algebra and gym class. You ever do pull-ups? he asked Jasmine one afternoon while balancing a peanut butter sandwich on his knee in the backyard. Once, she said, I fell and cracked my chin open. He winced. Yikes. Got stitches in a mobile clinic under a parking garage. The guy used fishing line. Ethan's eyes went wide. No way. She smirked. Way. You're like the coolest person I know. Jasmine looked away, unsure how to hold praise that wasn't laced with sarcasm. That's a low bar, Ethan. I'm serious. Later that evening, after dinner, Mr. Caldwell called her into the study. He was sitting at the same desk as before, a mug of tea steaming beside a thick manila folder. She noticed that he looked healthier, his posture stronger, his cheeks less pale. I wanted to show you something, he said, tapping the folder. Jasmine sat across from him, arms folded out of habit. We've submitted for your school registration, he said. Lincoln High is willing to place you as a junior, based on what Leonard could piece together from old records. I haven't been in a real school since middle school, Jasmine replied. I barely remember algebra. That's what tutoring is for. She hesitated. And you're just doing this? Why? He leaned back. Because someone once paid for my tuition when I couldn't. Because someone once saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Because it's my turn. She lowered her eyes. It doesn't feel fair. It's not, he said. Fairness doesn't live in this world. But decency does, if we let it. No. They sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, there's more. He opened the folder again and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo old, bent at the edges. This is my wife, he said, sliding it across the desk. Ethan's mom. Her name was Sarah. Jasmine took the photo carefully. Sarah Caldwell had kind eyes and a strong jawline. She wore a red flannel shirt and no makeup. The photo was taken outdoors under the same oak tree in the backyard, Jasmine realized. She'd have liked you, he said. She used to say people who survive storms deserve the warmest shelters. Jasmine's throat tightened. I'm not trying to replace anyone, she said quickly. You're not, he replied. You're becoming someone, and we're lucky to witness it. The next day, Jasmine stood in front of her new closet. Inside were a few more outfits, simple jeans, plain shirts, a jacket that didn't smell like mildew. She picked out one of the new ones for her school orientation. She hadn't worn anything new in months. It made her feel like she was borrowing someone else's life. Ethan gave her a thumbs up from his doorway. You look like a student. She rolled her eyes. Thanks, nerd. I mean it. Outside, Mr. Caldwell waited by the car. He had made arrangements to drive her to the school himself, even though he had calls scheduled. She tried to protest. He waved her off. As the car rolled through the city, Jasmine stared out the window, passing the corners she used to sleep near, the buildings that once loomed over her like threats. Everything looks different, she said quietly. It is, he said, because you're looking at it from a seat you weren't allowed in before. The school was big, red-bricked, and humming with the chaos of teenagers. Jasmine's stomach twisted. She hadn't walked a hallway like this in years. Mr. Caldwell touched her shoulder before she got out. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Jasmine. Just be curious. Ask questions. You've already done the hardest part, showing up. She nodded, her hands clammy. He waited in the car until she disappeared inside. At the front desk, a woman smiled kindly and handed her a printed schedule, a school map, and a temporary ID. Jasmine clipped it to her jacket, fingers trembling slightly. Her first class was English literature. She arrived early, sat in the back. When the bell rang, the room filled quickly. Some students glanced at her, curious but not cruel. The teacher, a middle-aged man with a tired voice and coffee breath, called roll. Jasmine Taylor? He asked. She raised her hand. Welcome, he said simply, then continued. And just like that, she belonged at least for today. The classroom buzzed with the low murmur of students flipping pages and whispering half-heartedly as the English teacher droned on about symbolism in Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. Jasmine sat in the back row, her newly issued school binder open in front of her, pretending to take notes. The truth was, she already knew this book. She'd read it in one of the shelters a year ago, pages torn, cover missing, but the story had stuck. She understood George and Lenny better than she wanted to admit. People made promises. Some they meant, some they didn't. And sometimes, mercy looked a lot like betrayal. Her pen moved slowly across the page, drawing loops and lines with no words, just shapes. Still, she was present. She was here. And for now, that counted. At lunch, Jasmine hesitated outside the cafeteria. The noise inside was louder than she expected. Teenagers clustered in noisy groups, laughter echoing, trays clattering. Her first instinct was to turn around and find a bathroom to hide in, but then she remembered what Mr. Caldwell had said. "You've already done the hardest part, showing up." She took a breath and stepped in. No one noticed her at first. She moved to the line, took a tray, picked at the options. Everything smelled like processed cheese and artificial chicken, but it was hot, and it was hers. That was enough. Just as she scanned the room for a quiet table, she heard a voice behind her. "You're the new girl, right?" Yasmin turned. A girl with dark braids and a wide smile stood there, holding a tray and balancing a fruit cup. "I'm Marley," the girl said. "Saw you in lit. You looked like you wanted to disappear." "Maybe I did," Jasmine said cautiously. Marley grinned. "Well, too bad. Come on." She led Jasmine to a table with two other kids, one boy with thick glasses and a Rubik's Cube in hand, the other a tall girl with braces and a quiet stare. "This is thank you," Marley said, pointing to the boy. "And that's Lila. Don't worry. They're harmless. We sit here every day. No drama." Jasmine sat slowly, unsure if she was intruding. "Where you from?" Thank you asked, twisting his cube without looking. Jasmine hesitated. "Everywhere. Nowhere." "Same," Lila said softly. "We moved a lot. Foster care." Jasmine blinked. She didn't reply, but a small nod passed between them, unspoken recognition. There were kids like her here. Maybe not in number, but in truth. Marley raised an eyebrow. "You gonna tell us your story, or are we gonna have to dig it out of the principal's office?" Jasmine smirked. "You could try." They laughed, and for the first time in what felt like years, Jasmine didn't feel like the outsider with a secret. She was just a student with a tray and a table. When she got home that afternoon the word still felt foreign. Ethan was already on the back patio, throwing a tennis ball against the wall, catching it with practiced ease. "How was it?" he asked as she dropped her bag beside a chair. "Loud, weird, not terrible. That's like top-tier praise coming from you." She shrugged. "Did you make any friends?" "Maybe. Just don't forget I was here first." She rolled her eyes. "Relax. You're still the weirdest person I know." That evening, dinner was spaghetti and garlic bread. Mr. Caldwell asked about her classes. Jasmine told him about English and gym and the confusing lunch system that charged different amounts depending on what line you picked. "I'll have Miss Holland speak to the school," he said. "Make sure you're on the meal plan." Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. It was easier, sometimes, to let kindness happen than to fight it on principle. After dinner, Ethan dragged her into the den where they played an old board game he insisted was a family tradition. She didn't understand the rules but managed to beat him twice. He claimed it was beginner's luck. She knew better. Later, as the house quieted, Jasmine stepped out onto the back porch alone. The sky was a deep indigo, the kind of color that only comes after rain and just before a clear stretch of weather. She looked up at the stars and whispered to herself, "Don't get used to this." But her voice lacked conviction. Back in her room, she opened the notebook again. Day 5. They keep calling this a home. I keep waiting for it to vanish. But each time I open my eyes, it's still here. Maybe not forever, but maybe long enough. The morning began with fog rolling in low across the lawn, soft and thick, like a secret the city didn't want to tell. Jasmine stood by her bedroom window, sipping from a cup of lukewarm tea. She hadn't slept much. A strange tension had settled in her chest like the air before a storm. Even though the forecast promised nothing but Sunday, school had started to feel routine. Familiar hallways, familiar faces. Marley had become a quiet anchor, funny, sharp, and protective, without asking too many questions. Thank You had offered to help with math, and Lila passed her cryptic but oddly supportive notes during biology. Still, Jasmine had learned long ago not to lean too hard on nice things. They broke too easily. Downstairs, the house stirred to life. Ethan banged a cabinet searching for cereal, and Miss Holland's footsteps clicked methodically along the tile. Jasmine pulled on her jacket and grabbed her backpack, pausing only once to glance at the mirror. She still didn't look like she belonged. But the difference was she didn't look like she was running either. At school, things took a turn. It started with a whisper, just a sliver of a sentence Jasmine caught walking past the lockers. "You know she's not really a Caldwell, right?" She froze, fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. Two girls leaned near the water fountain, one of them clutching a phone. "My cousin said she's from a shelter," the taller girl whispered. "Caldwell's picked her up off the street, like Charity." "Seriously?" the other said. "Why's she even here then? This isn't a halfway house." Ugh. Jasmine's heart thudded. She turned before they saw her and walked briskly to homeroom. All day, it followed her. Not outright cruelty, just side eyes, quiet speculation, the sense that the walls were listening. A few teachers spoke more slowly to her, as if she were fragile. One kid in gym muttered, "Better not steal my stuff," under his breath while locking his locker. By lunchtime, her appetite had vanished. Marley noticed. "Okay, what's going on?" she said, sitting down across from Jasmine with her usual tray of fries and fruit. "Nothing," Jasmine muttered. "Liar. You're brooding. That's my thing." Jasmine forced a small laugh but said nothing. Marley leaned in. "You know this place can smell fear, right? Like blood in the water. Don't give them the satisfaction." "I'm not scared," Jasmine said. "I'm tired. Of proving I deserve to be anywhere." Marley's expression softened. "You don't have to prove it. You already did. You wake up. You show up. You try. That's enough." After school, Jasmine didn't go straight home. She walked. Past the library. Past the corner where she used to sit with her coat zipped to her chin and her stomach hollow. Past the shelter that once gave her 2 nights and then sent her away with a granola bar and a pamphlet. When she finally reached the Caldwell house, it was late. The lights in the foyer were dim. Ethan was sitting on the front steps, tossing a small rubber ball in the air. "You good?" he asked, standing when he saw her. She nodded. "You sure?" Jasmine hesitated. "Some kids found out where I came from." Ethan didn't ask what they said. He didn't need to. He just nodded, then said, "You want me to tell Dad?" "No," she said. "I don't want to be a problem." "You're not." She looked at him. "You're not a problem," he repeated, this time more firmly. "You're the reason my dad's alive, the reason I'm not alone. They don't get to say anything about that." Jasmine stared down at her boots. "I don't want people to think I'm here for charity." "You're not," he said. "You're here because you belong." They stood in silence for a while. Eventually, they both sat on the step, watching the porch light flicker as moths danced around it. Inside, Mr. Caldwell watched from the window. He didn't interrupt. He didn't hover. He just let the quiet unfold. That night, Jasmine didn't write in her notebook. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if belonging was something you earned or something people gave you like a gift. She had no answer, but in the stillness, she didn't feel alone. Not tonight. The morning sun brought with it the sharp snap of autumn in the air, crisp, bright, and biting enough to make Jasmine pull her jacket tighter as she waited on the Caldwell porch. She stood with one hand on the iron railing, watching leaves drift lazily onto the brick walkway. The house behind her was still quiet, the kind of silence that hinted at busy days and conversations yet to start. She held a letter in her hand. The envelope was thin, plain, and unsealed. She had written it the night before, after tossing and turning in bed, the words spilling out of her faster than she could stop them. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, thank you for everything. For the food, the bed, the safety, for not asking me to explain every scar. But I don't think I'm meant to stay. Not because you've done anything wrong, just because I don't know how to live in a world where I don't expect the door to close again. You've given me more than anyone ever has, and that terrifies me." She hadn't signed it. She wasn't even sure she'd give it to him. Thinking of mailing that or eating it for breakfast? A voice called behind her. Jasmine turned to find Mr. Caldwell stepping onto the porch, his coat over his arm, coffee mug in hand. He looked more rested lately. Stronger. like someone getting a second wind. I wasn't sure if I'd give it to you, she said. He nodded, stepping beside her. Well, since I'm here, might as well read it, right? She handed it over, her fingers brushing his. As he read, the only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind and the occasional car passing by. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully, not crumpling it or dismissing it. You know, he said, Sarah, my wife once left me a letter like this. Right after Ethan was born. She thought I was working too much, thought I wasn't present enough, thought I'd miss all the moments that mattered. Did you? He took a sip of coffee. Some, but I got better. Jasmine looked away. I don't want to run, she said. But it's what I've always done. It's the only thing that felt safe. He nodded. Sometimes we run because we're not afraid of being hurt. We're afraid of healing, afraid of what it means to stay somewhere long enough to start trusting. She breathed in deeply, the cold air stinging her lungs. I don't want to disappoint anyone. You haven't, not once. They stood in silence for a while, watching the world wake up. I want to try, she said at last, to stay, but I need time. You have it, he replied without hesitation. She turned to go back inside but paused. Did Sarah stay? He smiled faintly. She did. And I never forgot how close I came to losing her. I won't make that mistake twice. Later that day, Jasmine returned to school. The stares hadn't vanished, but they had dulled, like background noise she could tune out. Marley met her at their usual table in the cafeteria with 2 cartons of chocolate milk and a look that said, If anyone messes with you, I brought backup. In biology, Lila handed her a folded note. Some people will never stop seeing the past. That's their blindness, not your burden. And that afternoon, Jasmine joined Ethan in the backyard for their usual round of, don't talk about feelings, just throw the ball. But as they sat under the oak tree afterward, Jasmine did something she hadn't done in years. She leaned her head on someone's shoulder, his, and stayed there. The week had rolled on with a gentle rhythm Jasmine had never known before. Her mornings were filled with textbooks and whispered jokes in the hallways, afternoons with tutoring, and evenings spent watching movies or helping Miss Holland sort through dusty photo albums for a charity project. The house felt less like a mansion and more like something almost impossible, like a place that remembered her name. But peace has a way of inviting its opposite. It started late one Friday afternoon. Jasmine had just stepped off the school bus, the cold nipping at her cheeks as she walked up the long Caldwell driveway. She liked these quiet moments, just her, the wind, and the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Then she saw the car. It was parked outside the gate, a beat-up, rust-colored Buick that looked out of place in front of the clean-cut hedges. Her stomach dropped before her brain caught up. That car wasn't from this world, it was from the one she'd left behind. A man stepped out, tall, thin. His leather jacket cracked at the sleeves, jeans sagging slightly. His eyes squinted in the sun, but even from yards away, Jasmine recognized the smirk on his face. Raymond.